Morning sunlight spilled over the quiet streets of Fairhaven, a small suburban town where lawns were neat and fences were white, but not everything behind them was peaceful. The school bus rolled through the last turn, its yellow paint dulled by years of rain and laughter and tears. Inside, a boy named Ethan Cole, 13 years old, sat alone near the back, his backpack hugged to his chest like armor. Every bump in the road made him tighten his grip a little more. A group of older boys sat 3 seats ahead, whispering, glancing back at him, their laughter low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the engine. They'd been after him for weeks now, first about his size, then about his old shoes, and finally, about something that wasn't even his fault. His dad had left last year, and kids that age could smell weakness like wolves. When the bus stopped at Fairhaven Middle, Ethan waited until everyone else got off. He walked slowly, head down, the way kids learn to walk when they don't want to be noticed. But the world notices anyway. By lunchtime, it got worse. They tripped him in the cafeteria line, spilled milk across his notebook, and called him names that clung harder than any bruise. The teachers saw, but their eyes slid away. It wasn't cruelty, it was fatigue. They'd seen too many kids like Ethan and too many bullies like the ones who chased him. After school, he didn't go home right away. He sat on the curb near the field where the highway started. His house was only 3 blocks away, but the silence there felt heavier than the noise here. His mom worked double shifts at the diner, and most nights, dinner was reheated leftovers and a voicemail goodnight. So he sat, staring at the road. Every few minutes, a motorcycle roared past, the sound deep and alive, like freedom wearing leather and steel. Ethan watched those riders vanish into the distance, and something inside him stirred fear, admiration, maybe both. That night, when his mom came home exhausted, she found his notebook open on the table. Inside were doodles of motorcycles, rows of them, different shapes, big engines, wings drawn on the tanks. Underneath one sketch, he'd written a single line: if someone like that were around, they'd stop it. The next day, things didn't get better. One of the bullies, Jason Pike, decided to film him, pushed him near the lockers while his friends laughed and recorded. The video went around the school before lunch. By the time Ethan found out, half the hallways were whispering. He tried to hold it in, but when he got outside, he just started walking past the bus stop, past the strip mall, all the way down to the edge of town where the road widened into the state highway. That's where he met Bear, though Ethan didn't know his name yet. Bear was leaning against his Harley outside a gas station, refilling a thermos of coffee. He wore a black vest with faded patches, Iron Legacy MC, the same club that had been on the news months back for helping rebuild a storm-hit town up north. His beard was gray around the edges, his eyes steady, kind but unreadable. When Ethan walked past, Bear noticed the bruises on his arm, the slump in his shoulders. He didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, a small acknowledgement, the kind that says, "I see you." Ethan hesitated, then blurted out the question that had been building in his chest all day. He asked if bikers ever helped kids who were in trouble. Bear studied him for a moment before answering, his voice low and calm. He said bikers help whoever needs it, as long as it's for the right reason. Then he asked why Ethan was asking. The boy told him about the bullies, the video, and how everyone had looked away. His words came out shaky, too fast, but Bear listened all the way through, nodding slowly. When Ethan finished, the man didn't laugh or shrug. He just said, "Sometimes it takes more than one voice to make the noise stop." He reached into his vest, pulled out a small patch with the Iron Legacy emblem, a skull with wings wrapped around a gear, and handed it to the boy. "Keep this," he said. "If you ever really need help, you show this. Someone from the road will hear." Ethan didn't really understand what that meant, but he tucked the patch into his pocket and thanked him. Then he walked home, his heart beating a little faster than usual. For the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, someone would care. That night, Bear rode out of town, the roar of his Harley fading into the dark. But the story didn't end there. A week later, a rumor started spreading around the Iron Legacy clubhouse about a kid in Fairhaven who'd been pushed too far. Bear didn't start that rumor. He didn't have to. Sometimes good stories find their way to the right ears. By the time the weekend came, 58 bikes were tuned and ready. No one called it a mission. No one gave orders. They just knew what needed to be done. And on Monday morning, when the school buses pulled up to Fairhaven Middle, the sound that met them wasn't laughter or whispers. It was the deep, rolling thunder of 58 motorcycles idling at the front gates. 58 men and women in black vests, boots planted firm on the pavement, standing in quiet unity. Ethan stepped off the bus and froze. He saw Bear among them, arms crossed, watching the doors. The bullies didn't laugh that day. No one did. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. What happened next would ripple through that town for years. But in that moment, all Ethan could feel was the steady hum of engines behind him, 58 hearts beating as one. The rumble of engines lingered in the morning air like thunder that refused to fade. Fairhaven Middle had never seen anything like it. Teachers peered out from classroom windows, parents slowed their cars, and students stopped mid-step, unsure whether to be afraid or in awe. 58 motorcycles gleamed in the sunlight, lined up perfectly along the curb, chrome flashing like armor. And at the center stood Bear, calm, steady, the kind of presence that carried quiet authority. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, frozen. He wasn't sure if this was really happening. He could feel the eyes of everyone around him, students, teachers, even the principal stepping out of the front doors, her hands tight around her clipboard. For once, all that attention wasn't aimed at mocking him. It was confusion, curiosity, and something new, respect. Bear didn't say a word. None of them did. That was what made it powerful. They weren't there to shout or scare anyone. They were there to be seen, to stand where no one else had. Their silence spoke louder than any threat ever could. Joey, the youngest of the riders, took off his helmet and crouched near Ethan, giving him a small smile. "We heard about you," he said quietly. "You've got a lot more strength than you think, kid." Ethan swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. He looked around, at the rows of patched vests, each one marked with the same emblem Bear had given him. The Iron Legacy. He reached into his pocket and felt the patch again, the one that had started all this. For the first time in months, the weight on his chest didn't feel so heavy. By then, Principal Hayes had made her way down the steps, her voice shaky but polite as she asked what was going on. Bear turned toward her and nodded respectfully. He explained that they weren't there to cause trouble. They were there to support a student who'd been hurt, ignored, and humiliated while others looked away. He said they believed every kid deserved to feel safe walking through those doors. The principal hesitated. She'd seen stories about the Iron Legacy on the news, how they rebuilt homes, guarded hospitals, rode for causes no one else would touch. Still, the sight of them all here, leather, steel, and solidarity, was overwhelming. But then she looked at Ethan, and she understood. This wasn't about intimidation. It was about protection. About presence. So she nodded. "You can stay," she said softly. "Just keep it peaceful." Bear smiled, a small, grateful smile, and tipped his head. "Always is, ma'am." When the first bell rang, the bikers didn't leave. They formed a quiet line near the entrance, standing like sentinels as students walked past. Some kids whispered, others stared, and a few smiled nervously. But everyone felt it, that change in the air, the shift in balance. The ones who'd laughed at Ethan now couldn't meet his eyes. The ones who'd stayed silent before started nodding to him in passing. Fear had been replaced by something else entirely, awareness. Inside, classes began as usual, but the energy was different. Teachers looked out the windows more than once, surprised to still see the riders waiting. They didn't move, didn't make noise, just stood together, arms crossed, boots planted, patient and strong. The message was simple and unmistakable. Someone cares. Someone is watching. By lunchtime, word had spread beyond the school. Parents arrived with questions, local reporters showed up, and social media was buzzing. "Biker Club protects bullied student" was the headline making rounds. But for Ethan, none of that mattered. All he knew was that when he walked down the hallway that day, no one tripped him, no one whispered behind his back. And when Jason, the ringleader of the bullies, passed him by, Even he looked down instead of smirking. When school ended, the bikers were still there. The students filed out, their voices quieter than usual. Bear walked forward as Ethan stepped onto the sidewalk. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder, gentle, steady. "You did well today," he said. "You didn't hide. That's the start of everything." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He wanted to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just stood there, trying to take in the moment, the row of bikes, the sunlight bouncing off their chrome, the rumble of engines that felt more like a heartbeat than a sound. Then Bear turned to the others and gave a small signal. One by one, the bikers started their engines, the roar building into a single, deep note that filled the air like music. They didn't leave all at once. They rode off 2 by 2, slow, respectful, leaving behind only the sound of fading thunder and the sight of students waving in awe. When the last of them disappeared over the hill, Ethan realized something. The fear that used to cling to him every morning was gone. It hadn't been chased away by threats or punishment. It had been replaced by something stronger, the knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore. That evening, Bear and the others met at the edge of town, near a rest stop overlooking the city lights. Red, one of the older members, leaned on his handlebars and asked if they thought they'd made a difference. Bear didn't hesitate. He said, "Maybe not for everyone. But for one kid, yeah, that's enough." And in the glow of the setting sun, the Iron Legacy rode again, not toward glory or thanks, but toward the next quiet fight that no one else could see. In Fairhaven, though, their presence lingered. The story spread. Teachers started watching closely. Parents talked to their kids more. And somewhere deep inside, a boy named Ethan Cole began to believe that courage didn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it could just be steady, patient, and kind. The next morning, Fairhaven woke up to something new, silence that wasn't empty, but full of thought. The usual morning chatter outside the school had softened. Parents lingered longer at drop-off, their eyes scanning the parking lot as if expecting to see the bikers again. But the row of motorcycles was gone, leaving only faint tire marks on the pavement and a lingering hum in everyone's memory. Ethan sat on the bus again, same seat as always, but this time it felt different. No one was whispering about him. The same boys who used to snicker every morning now stared out their windows, pretending he wasn't there. He didn't know what to do with the quiet. He just let it be. When he walked through the school doors, kids glanced his way, not mocking, just curious. A few even nodded. One girl, Lily from his science class, smiled shyly and said she thought it was cool what the bikers did. Ethan didn't know how to respond, so he just said thanks and kept walking. In homeroom, the teacher called for attention, but her voice was softer than usual. The events of yesterday had reached the district office, even the local news station. Cameras had shown up late in the day, capturing shots of the riders, the school, and that moment where Bear's hand rested on Ethan's shoulder. By evening, the image had gone viral. Biker Brotherhood stands for bullied boy. The school was cautious about it. They didn't want controversy. But they couldn't deny what everyone had seen. The principal called an assembly that morning. She spoke about kindness, respect, and standing up for others. Her words carried more weight now, maybe because the entire town was listening. Ethan sat in the front row, heart racing. When she mentioned a brave young student who found unexpected allies, his stomach tightened. Everyone knew who she meant. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, but it didn't feel the same as before. It wasn't pity, it was something gentler, almost protective. That night at home, the air felt lighter. His mom had seen the video too. She'd cried quietly at the kitchen table while watching it on her phone. When Ethan came downstairs, she hugged him so tight it almost hurt. She whispered that she hadn't realized how bad it had gotten and that she was proud of him for not giving up. He told her about Bear, about the patch, about how the bikers just showed up without him asking. She smiled through tears. Good people still find their way to the right places, she said. Even when we don't know how. A few days passed, and life slowly returned to its rhythm. The bikers didn't come back, but their presence stayed like an echo, visible in the way students started sitting together at lunch instead of in cliques, in how teachers seemed more alert, in how the bullies began to fade into the background. Jason, the ringleader, kept quiet. Some said his parents made him apologize. Others said Bear had spoken to him privately before leaving. No one knew for sure, and Bear wasn't the kind of man to talk about things like that. One afternoon, Ethan walked home along the same road where he'd first met Bear. The gas station looked the same, the smell of fuel, the hum of passing trucks, the fluttering flags above the roof. But something inside him had shifted. He wasn't looking at the ground anymore. His steps were steady. He didn't even notice when a pickup passed by and someone shouted his name to say hey. As he reached the crosswalk, he heard that familiar sound, the deep, rolling growl of a Harley engine. He turned, and there he was. Bear, in the same vest, same calm eyes, pulling up beside him. Ethan grinned without meaning to. Bear lifted his helmet visor and nodded. "Heard you've been holding your head up a little higher," he said. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "It's different now." Bear chuckled. "It should be. You earned it." They sat on the curb together for a while, watching cars roll by. Bear asked about school, and Ethan told him things were better, not perfect, but better. That people seemed to care now. Then, after a moment, he asked the question that had been sitting in his chest since that day. "Why did you all come?" he said quietly. "You didn't even know me." Bear's answer was simple. "Because we've all been there. Maybe not in the same way, but close enough to remember what it feels like. Sometimes it takes someone standing beside you to remind you that you're not invisible." Ethan thought about that for a long time. The rumble of engines, the line of riders, the way the whole town had stopped to watch, all of it had been more than just a show of strength. It was proof that kindness didn't need permission to be powerful. Before leaving, Bear reached into his vest again. This time, he handed Ethan something different, a small metal tag engraved with the Iron Legacy emblem and a number underneath. "That's yours now," he said. "Doesn't mean you're a member. Just means you've got family on the road if you ever need it." Ethan took the tag carefully, holding it like it was made of glass. He didn't say anything, just nodded, because sometimes words can't reach where gratitude lives. Bear smiled, put his helmet back on, and with a deep rumble, rode off down the highway. The sound faded slowly, replaced by the wind in the trees and the steady rhythm of Ethan's heartbeat. That night, before bed, Ethan hung the tag on the corner of his desk lamp. It caught the light just right, casting a small reflection on the wall, the shape of wings around a gear. He stared at it for a while, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he fell asleep without worry. In the days that followed, he began noticing something new. Other kids were changing too. A boy who used to eat alone in the cafeteria now had company. 2 girls who never spoke before teamed up for a project. Even the teachers seemed to smile more. It was like that single act, 58 bikers standing at a school gate, had reminded everyone of something they'd forgotten, that courage can be quiet and kindness can spread faster than cruelty if you just give it a chance. And in that small suburban town of Fairhaven, the lesson stayed long after the engines stopped echoing down the road. In the days after the riders left, Fairhaven seemed quieter, not empty, but reflective. It was the kind of silence that follows a song everyone knows will stay with them long after it ends. People talked about what happened in grocery lines, at coffee shops, in hushed tones at Sunday church. Some called it a miracle, others called it a statement. But everyone agreed on one thing: it had changed something in their town. At school, Ethan found himself in unfamiliar territory. He wasn't invisible anymore. Teachers greeted him by name. Classmates nodded to him in the halls, and for once, his lunch table wasn't empty. Lily started sitting with him, and sometimes even Jason, the boy who used to make his life miserable, would walk by and give a brief nod instead of a sneer. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was the first step toward peace. Ethan didn't flaunt what had happened. He didn't brag about the bikers or tell wild stories. He just carried himself a little taller, a little steadier. The patch Bear had given him stayed in his backpack, a quiet reminder that courage could come from the most unexpected places. The metal tag hung from his desk lamp, and every night it caught the moonlight like a promise. Meanwhile, the video kept spreading. A local news station ran a segment about it, calling the Iron Legacy a force for good on the open road. Then regional channels picked it up. Within a week, people from across the country were sharing it online, veterans, teachers, even other biker clubs. Hashtags like hashtag stand for kindness and hashtag ride for respect started popping up. It wasn't just a story anymore, it was a movement. In a coffee shop downtown, a group of parents decided to start a mentorship program for kids who were struggling at school. The principal, inspired by what she'd witnessed, began organizing assemblies focused on empathy and courage. Even the mayor made a statement, thanking the Iron Legacy for reminding our town of the power of presence and the importance of compassion. But for Ethan, the biggest change came one Saturday afternoon, a week after it all began. His mom was working late, so he went for a walk down to the park near the old bridge. The air smelled of rain and cut grass, and the world felt calm for once. He was sitting on a bench, sketching in his notebook, when he heard the low, familiar growl of an engine. He looked up and saw a single motorcycle pulling in, matte black, with a small Iron Legacy patch on the saddlebag. It wasn't Bear this time. It was a woman, maybe in her late 30s, with long auburn hair tucked under her helmet. She parked, took off her gloves, and smiled at him. "You must be Ethan," she said. "Name's Clara. I ride with the Legacy out of Maple Falls. Bear told us about you." Ethan blinked, surprised. "He did." She nodded, sitting down beside him on the bench. "He said you reminded him of someone he used to know. Someone who learned the hard way that standing up doesn't mean standing alone." They talked for a while, about school, about the noise that comes with growing up, about how kindness sometimes takes more courage than people realize. Clara told him that since his story got out, other clubs had started showing up at schools across the country, not to intimidate, but to support. Some read to kids, others donated helmets and jackets to children who couldn't afford them. "You started something, kid," she said with a grin. "You might not see it yet, but you did." Ethan didn't know what to say. The idea that something he'd been ashamed of, being bullied, being afraid, could turn into something that helped others felt unreal. But the way Clara said it, calm and sure, made him believe it might be true. Before she left, she handed him a small folded paper, a photo. It showed all 58 bikers lined up outside his school that morning, the American flag waving behind them. He was in the picture too, standing near the front steps, small but visible. At the bottom of the photo was a handwritten note, "Sometimes courage rides quietly. Bear." Ethan smiled at the photo for a long time after she left. He slipped it into his notebook between two sketches, one of his own, and one Bear had signed when they first met. And for the first time, he realized this wasn't just his story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been afraid, everyone who had ever needed someone to stand beside them. Weeks passed. The town slowly returned to normal, but it was a different kind of normal, one with softer edges. Kids helped each other more. Adults paid more attention. Even the bullies began to shift, unsure what to do in a place where cruelty was no longer admired. One day, Jason sat down next to Ethan in class and asked for help with an assignment. It wasn't much, but it was something. And Ethan, remembering Bear's words, "Sometimes it takes more than one voice to make the noise stop," decided to help. Not because he had to, but because maybe Jason needed someone to show him what kindness looked like, too. By the end of the school year, Fairhaven Middle had a new tradition. Every spring, they held a Ride for Respect Day. Local bikers, some from the Iron Legacy, others just independent riders, would visit, share stories, and let students sit on their bikes for photos. It wasn't a parade or a show of power. It was a reminder. A reminder that heroes don't always wear capes, sometimes they wear road dust and leather, and sometimes they carry quiet courage in their hearts. And every year, when the engines rumbled through the streets again, Ethan stood a little taller, feeling the same vibration in his chest, that same hum of belonging, of protection, of brotherhood. Time moved the way it always does in small towns, quietly, almost unnoticed. Seasons changed. The trees around Fairhaven Middle turned from green to gold, and before anyone realized it, Ethan wasn't a quiet, nervous boy anymore. He was growing into someone different, someone steadier. A year had passed since the day the bikers lined up outside the school. The photo of them still hung in the hallway near the principal's office. Most students passed it without thinking, but those who knew the story, those who had seen it happen, felt a little something when they walked by. A reminder that courage could come in unexpected ways. Ethan had joined the art club, started volunteering at a local animal shelter, and even helped run the school's kindness program that the principal had started after the event. He didn't do it for recognition. He just wanted to make sure no one else had to feel the way he once did, invisible, scared, small. Sometimes, after school, he'd ride his bike, the pedal kind, not the Harley, down to the gas station where he'd first met Bear. The place still smelled like oil and asphalt, and the same old man worked behind the counter, flipping through motorcycle magazines. Every once in a while, a rider from the Iron Legacy would stop for fuel, and Ethan would sit on the curb, just talking. They all knew who he was. The kid from Fairhaven. The one who'd inspired a movement without meaning to. Bear came through town every few months. Sometimes he'd stay for coffee, sometimes just long enough to shake Ethan's hand and ask how he was doing. He never talked about what the club was working on or where they were headed next. But he always left behind something small, a sticker, a patch, once even a keychain with the words "Stay True" engraved on it. By the time Ethan reached high school, he had a small group of friends who knew the story too. They didn't treat him like a legend. To them, he was just Ethan, the guy who'd been through something big and came out kinder. And that was enough. But even as life moved forward, the memory of that morning stayed sharp in his mind, the line of bikes, the sound that shook the ground, the way fear had turned into strength. It was more than just protection. It was proof that compassion could roar. When he turned 16, something special happened. On his birthday morning, his mom handed him an envelope. Inside was a photo and a small note. The photo showed Bear and a few Iron Legacy riders standing next to a motorcycle, an older one, rebuilt and polished. The note said, "Every man needs a road that reminds him who he is. Come see us." Ethan's heart raced. That weekend, he and his mom drove 2 hours north to the Iron Legacy clubhouse, a wide, open lot with flags flying and rows of bikes glinting in the sun. The men and women there welcomed him like family. They didn't talk about the past, but it was in their eyes, pride, warmth, quiet understanding. Bear met him by the gate, his hands greasy from tuning an engine. He looked older, a little more tired, but his smile was the same. "You made it," he said. "You've grown." Ethan grinned. "You said to find my road." Bear nodded and led him to the same motorcycle from the photo, a dark blue Yamaha Cruiser with a few miles on it, but a whole lot of heart left. "She's yours," Bear said simply. "From the club. We all chipped in. Not to make you one of us, but to remind you that kindness goes both ways." Ethan didn't know what to say. His hands trembled as he touched the handlebars. I don't even have a license yet." Bear chuckled. "Then you've got something to work toward." They spent the day together, Bear teaching him the basics, others cheering from the sidelines. It wasn't about speed or skill. It was about connection to the road, to the wind, to something bigger than himself. When the sun started to dip, Ethan looked at Bear and asked him what kept the Iron Legacy going all these years. Bear thought for a long moment before answering. "We ride because there's always someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist. You don't have to be on a bike to carry that. You just have to live like you mean it." Those words stayed with Ethan. They followed him back home, into his dreams, into the way he carried himself every day after. He worked hard, got his motorcycle license the following summer, and on his 17th birthday, rode that blue cruiser through the same streets where the Iron Legacy once stood watch. Neighbors waved. Kids pointed. And some adults, seeing him pass, smiled in quiet recognition. They remembered the boy who once sat alone at a bus stop, the boy who'd been protected by 58 riders and had grown into someone who could protect others in his own way. That evening, Ethan parked his bike by the school gate, the same spot where Bear had stood, and watched the sunset paint the pavement gold. The air was still, warm, full of memory. He didn't need the roar of 58 engines now. He just needed the heartbeat of one. His own. And somewhere out there, on some long stretch of highway, the Iron Legacy rode again, not because the world was perfect, but because there was always someone worth standing up for. Years have a way of slipping by when you're busy becoming someone. By the time Ethan turned 18, Fairhaven had grown just as he had: new houses, new faces, new stories. But some things never changed. The quiet main street still filled with the smell of coffee and motor oil on Saturday mornings. The old bridge still creaked under passing trucks. And the sound of a motorcycle engine could still make people pause and look up with a faint smile. Ethan had graduated high school by then. His hair was longer, his shoulders broader, and his eyes steadier, the kind that carried both kindness and a quiet fire. He worked part-time at a mechanic shop and studied community leadership at the local college. He wasn't sure what his future looked like yet, but he knew one thing: whatever he did, it had to mean something. He still rode that blue Yamaha, his gift from Bear and the Iron Legacy, every day. It wasn't just a machine to him. It was memory, motion, and message all in one. The chrome might have been scratched and the seat a little worn, but to Ethan, it was perfect. He rode it to work, to school, sometimes just out into the countryside when he needed to think. Those rides were like meditation, just him, the wind, and the rhythm of the road. Every once in a while, he still heard from Bear. A postcard. A photo. A phone call that started with a rumble of laughter and ended with advice disguised as stories. Bear never talked much about himself, but Ethan could tell the years on the road were catching up to him. There was more gravel in his voice, more pauses between his sentences. But his words still carried that same weight, the kind that stuck with you long after the call ended. One chilly autumn evening, Ethan got a call from Clara, the same Iron Legacy rider who had first visited him in the park years earlier. Her tone was softer this time, more serious. She said Bear wasn't doing too well, a heart condition, nothing sudden, but enough to slow him down. The club was planning a gathering at the old meeting grounds to honor him. She asked if Ethan could come. He didn't hesitate. 2 days later, he packed a small bag, checked the oil on his bike, and hit the highway at dawn. The air was cold, biting at his fingertips through the gloves, but the road felt familiar, comforting even. He followed the same stretch Bear once rode out of town on years ago. Every mile felt like a memory coming full circle. When he reached the Iron Legacy grounds, dozens of bikes were already parked in neat rows. Flags fluttered, the smell of barbecue filled the air, and the low hum of conversation carried across the open field. Men and women in leather vests embraced, laughed, and shared stories that reached back decades. It wasn't a somber gathering, it was a celebration of the man who had taught them all what it meant to live with purpose. Bear was there, sitting in a folding chair near the fire pit, a blanket draped over his legs. His beard was whiter now, his hands slower, but his eyes still carried that same steady spark. When he saw Ethan approach, a grin stretched across his weathered face. "About time he showed up," Bear said, his voice low but warm. Ethan smiled. "Had to make sure the bike remembered the way." Bear chuckled. "She did good, I bet." They talked for hours about life, the road, the people they'd met along the way. Bear listened as Ethan told him about school, about the kids he'd started mentoring at the youth center, about how Fairhaven had its own small ride every spring now, a tribute to the day everything changed. Bear's eyes softened. "So you kept the road alive," he said quietly. "That's all any of us could hope for." As the sun set, the club gathered around a campfire. Someone passed around a microphone, and one by one, people shared stories about Bear, the rescues, the late-night rides, the quiet kindnesses no one ever saw. When it was Ethan's turn, he stood up, nervous but determined. He told them about the day Bear handed him the patch, about the way 58 bikers changed one small town forever. His voice cracked halfway through, but no one minded. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the circle. Bear didn't say anything, he just reached out a trembling hand and gripped Ethan's shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. That night, long after the fire had burned low, Ethan sat alone by his bike under the stars. He thought about everything Bear had done, everything the club stood for. And he realized something important: the Iron Legacy wasn't just a name. It was a living idea. It didn't belong to one man or one group. It belonged to anyone willing to ride for what was right. When morning came, Bear called him over before he left. He handed Ethan a small wooden box with the Iron Legacy emblem burned into the lid. Inside was Bear's old chain bracelet, the same one he'd worn in every photo Ethan had ever seen. "Keep it close," Bear said softly. "It's not about what it's worth. It's about what it reminds you to be." Ethan nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "I won't forget." Bear smiled faintly. "You already don't." As Ethan rode home that afternoon, the bracelet clinked softly against the handlebars. He didn't know what was waiting ahead: college, work, life, but he knew the direction his compass pointed. Not north, not south. Toward kindness. Toward courage. Toward the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. And somewhere behind him, the sound of engines rose, not following, not leading, but riding beside him in spirit. The road stretched out endless and open, and Ethan knew this was what legacy felt like. Winter came early that year. The first snow dusted the roofs of Fairhaven before Thanksgiving, settling softly on the roads and branches like a hush over the town. Ethan had been back home a few weeks when he got the call. It was short, quiet, just Clara's voice on the other end, steady but heavy. Bear had passed in his sleep. Peacefully. No pain. No drama. Just a man who had given everything to the road, taking his final rest. Ethan didn't speak for a few seconds after the line went quiet. He just stared out the window, watching the snow drift down, and felt something settle inside him. Not shock, not even sadness in the usual way, but a deep stillness. Bear had lived fully, he thought. He had done what he came to do. But still, it felt like a chapter closing too soon. The following weekend, the Iron Legacy gathered again, not for a ride this time, but for a farewell. Riders came from all over, hundreds of bikes lined up along the frozen stretch of highway leading to the memorial site. Their engines rumbled low and respectful, a chorus of gratitude that echoed across the hills. Ethan rode near the front, wearing his patched vest for the first time since Bear had handed it to him. The air was cold, biting through his gloves, but the moment felt warm. Every rider there knew that Bear's impact went far beyond the asphalt. He hadn't just built a club, he had built a movement of kindness disguised as leather and chrome. At the service, Clara spoke first. Her words were strong, the kind that seemed to ride the wind and settle gently on every listener. Bear believed we could make the world a little less cruel, she said. He believed in showing up, even when it was inconvenient. He believed that the loudest kind of courage is quiet compassion. Then it was Ethan's turn. He stepped forward, his breath visible in the cold air. "Bear taught me that strength isn't about fear or power," he said slowly. "It's about standing for someone who can't stand alone." He gave me a patch when I didn't believe I deserved it. And he told me to keep the road alive. I think that's what we all have to do now, keep the road alive. When the ceremony ended, everyone started their engines at once. The sound rolled like thunder through the valley, not in mourning but in salute. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, listening. He could almost hear Bear's voice in that sound, calm, proud, still guiding. That night, back home, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk with the wooden box Bear had given him, the chain bracelet resting inside. He turned it over in his hands, tracing the worn links, thinking about everything Bear had said, about legacy, about kindness, about not letting the world harden you. Fairhaven was quiet outside. A few snowflakes drifted past the window, catching the yellow glow of the streetlight. And then it hit him what Bear meant by keeping the road alive. It wasn't just about the bikes or the rides. It was about what they stood for. It was about carrying that spirit into everyday life. The next morning, Ethan went to the community center where he volunteered. The place was small, old, and often overlooked, but it was full of kids who needed the same thing he once did, someone to stand beside them. He talked to the director, a kind woman named Miss Harper, about an idea. "What if," he said, "we started something here, not a club exactly, but a program. For kids who've been bullied, left out, or just need a hand. A place where they can learn confidence, teamwork, maybe even fix bikes or build things together. Something that teaches strength the right way." Miss Harper smiled. Sounds like you already have a name for it. Ethan looked down at the bracelet on his wrist and smiled faintly. Yeah, I think I do. When morning came, Bear called him over before he left. He handed Ethan a small wooden box with the Iron Legacy emblem burned into the lid. Inside was Bear's old chain bracelet, the same one he'd worn in every photo Ethan had ever seen. Keep it close, Bear said softly. It's not about what it's worth. It's about what it reminds you to be. Ethan nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. I won't forget. Bear smiled faintly. You already don't. As Ethan rode home that afternoon, the bracelet clinked softly against the handlebars. He didn't know what was waiting ahead: college, work, life, but he knew the direction his compass pointed. Not north, not south. Toward kindness. Toward courage. Toward the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. And somewhere behind him, the sound of engines rose, not following, not leading, but riding beside him in spirit. The road stretched out endless and open, and Ethan knew this was what legacy felt like. Winter came early that year. The first snow dusted the roofs of Fairhaven before Thanksgiving, settling softly on the roads and branches like a hush over the town. Ethan had been back home a few weeks when he got the call. It was short, quiet, just Clara's voice on the other end, steady but heavy. Bear had passed in his sleep. Peacefully. No pain. No drama. Just a man who had given everything to the road, taking his final rest. Ethan didn't speak for a few seconds after the line went quiet. He just stared out the window, watching the snow drift down, and felt something settle inside him. Not shock, not even sadness in the usual way, but a deep stillness. Bear had lived fully, he thought. He had done what he came to do. But still, it felt like a chapter closing too soon. The following weekend, the Iron Legacy gathered again, not for a ride this time, but for a farewell. Riders came from all over, hundreds of bikes lined up along the frozen stretch of highway leading to the memorial site. Their engines rumbled low and respectful, a chorus of gratitude that echoed across the hills. Ethan rode near the front, wearing his patched vest for the first time since Bear had handed it to him. The air was cold, biting through his gloves, but the moment felt warm. Every rider there knew that Bear's impact went far beyond the asphalt. He hadn't just built a club, he had built a movement of kindness disguised as leather and chrome. At the service, Clara spoke first. Her words were strong, the kind that seemed to ride the wind and settle gently on every listener. Bear believed we could make the world a little less cruel, she said. He believed in showing up, even when it was inconvenient. He believed that the loudest kind of courage is quiet compassion. Then it was Ethan's turn. He stepped forward, his breath visible in the cold air. Bear taught me that strength isn't about fear or power, he said slowly. It's about standing for someone who can't stand alone. He gave me a patch when I didn't believe I deserved it. And he told me to keep the road alive. I think that's what we all have to do now, keep the road alive. When the ceremony ended, everyone started their engines at once. The sound rolled like thunder through the valley, not in mourning but in salute. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, listening. He could almost hear Bear's voice in that sound, calm, proud, still guiding. That night, back home, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk with the wooden box Bear had given him, the chain bracelet resting inside. He turned it over in his hands, tracing the worn links, thinking about everything Bear had said, about legacy, about kindness, about not letting the world harden you. Fairhaven was quiet outside. A few snowflakes drifted past the window, catching the yellow glow of the streetlight. And then it hit him, what Bear meant by keeping the road alive. It wasn't just about the bikes or the rides. It was about what they stood for. It was about carrying that spirit into everyday life. The next morning, Ethan went to the community center where he volunteered. The place was small, old, and often overlooked, but it was full of kids who needed the same thing he once did, someone to stand beside them. He talked to the director, a kind woman named Miss Harper, about an idea. What if, he said, we started something here, not a club exactly, but a program. For kids who've been bullied, left out, or just need a hand. A place where they can learn confidence, teamwork, maybe even fix bikes or build things together. Something that teaches strength the right way. Miss Harper smiled. Sounds like you already have a name for it. Ethan looked down at the bracelet on his wrist and smiled faintly. Yeah, I think I do. Over the next few months, he got to work. He reached out to the Iron Legacy chapter. Clara helped spread the word. Local businesses chipped in. Mechanics donated parts. Riders volunteered their weekends. Before long, the old garage behind the center was buzzing with life, engines being tuned, paint drying on helmets, laughter echoing through the space. They called it Legacy Garage. And every Friday after school, kids from all over Fairhaven came by, not just to learn about bikes, but to find belonging, to build something, to see that they mattered. Sometimes Ethan would catch sight of a shy kid in the corner, shoulders hunched, eyes down, and he'd see himself years ago. He'd walk over, toss them a rag, and say, "Want to help me with this?" And just like that, another wall would come down. He didn't talk about Bear much anymore. He didn't need to. Bear's spirit was everywhere, in the laughter, in the rumble of engines, in the quiet courage of the kids who were finding their strength. And every time Ethan rode home after closing up the shop, he'd glance at the empty passenger mirror, the one Bear used to adjust when he taught him to ride, and he'd swear, just for a second, that he saw a reflection there. A shadow of a man with a white beard and a knowing smile, riding beside him on the wind. The world kept turning. The roads kept calling. And somewhere deep in Ethan's heart, the promise stayed alive, not carved in stone, but carried in motion. By spring, the snow had melted into memory, and the sound of engines once again filled Fairhaven's air. But this time, it wasn't just the Iron Legacy's bikes rolling down Main Street. It was students, parents, and townspeople all gathering for something new, something that carried more than just horsepower and chrome. Legacy Garage had grown faster than Ethan ever imagined. What started as a few kids tinkering after school had become a full-blown community program. There were now 2 volunteers teaching bike safety, a retired machinist who handled repairs, and even a local artist who painted custom helmets with each kid's initials and a small pair of wings, Bear's emblem. Ethan didn't plan for it to become big. He just wanted to pass on what he'd been given: strength through kindness, courage through compassion. But somehow, people saw what he was doing and wanted to be part of it. Parents began stopping by on Saturdays, bringing snacks or helping clean up. Local news covered the story once, calling it a Brotherhood reborn. The article showed a photo of Ethan, arms folded, grinning beside a row of kids and bikes under the sign Legacy Garage. Beneath the headline, the caption read, "Inspired by the kindness of bikers years ago, one man pays it forward." At first, Ethan blushed at the attention. He didn't think he'd earned it. But when a few kids started coming up to him just to say thank you, he realized this was bigger than him. It wasn't about recognition, it was about connection. One Friday afternoon, as the sun slanted through the shop's open doors, Ethan noticed a new kid hanging back by the doorway. Small, maybe 12 or 13, with messy hair and a backpack that looked too heavy for his shoulders. He didn't speak much, just hovered near the entrance, watching the others work. Ethan walked over and smiled. "You like bikes?" The boy nodded shyly. "My dad used to." Before he left, Ethan didn't push. He just handed the boy a wrench. "Well, lucky for you, we've got one that needs a hand. Wanna help?" That small gesture, a wrench, a smile, an open door, turned into something remarkable. The boy, whose name was Jordan, started showing up every day. At first, he just helped clean, but soon he was learning to replace parts, polish frames, even test ride the smaller bikes around the parking lot. Ethan saw so much of himself in that kid, the quiet uncertainty, the way he kept glancing at the floor, like he wasn't sure he belonged anywhere. So Ethan made sure he did. He made sure every kid did. By the end of the year, Legacy Garage had repaired more than 50 community bikes, donated to families who couldn't afford them. But what mattered most wasn't the bikes. It was the people. The garage had become a safe place, a symbol of trust in a town that once thought bikers were just rough outsiders. And one summer evening, something happened that brought everything full circle. Fairhaven High was holding its annual graduation. Ethan had been invited, not as a student this time, but as a guest of honor. The principal said he wanted to recognize someone who had helped redefine courage in this town. When Ethan's name was called, the gym filled with applause. He walked onto the stage in his leather vest, the same one with Bear's old patch stitched over the heart. The principal shook his hand, but before Ethan could say anything, the back doors opened. The sound hit first, that deep, rolling thunder of motorcycle engines. Heads turned as 58 bikers from the Iron Legacy rolled slowly into the school parking lot outside. Not to make a scene. Not to take over. Just to be there. Kids rushed to the windows, teachers stepped aside, and the audience gasped as the line of bikes parked neatly in formation. At the front was Clara, her white helmet glinting under the lights. She looked through the window and gave Ethan a simple nod, proud, quiet, knowing. The crowd began to clap again, louder this time. Some students cheered, others cried. And Ethan stood there, blinking back tears he didn't expect. He realized what was happening. This was Bear's legacy alive and breathing. It wasn't about protection anymore. It was about presence. A reminder that strength can be soft, loyalty can be gentle, and courage doesn't always roar. After the ceremony, Ethan walked outside to greet them. The bikers stood in a half-circle around him, engines idling low. Clara swung off her bike, pulled off her helmet, and smiled. Bear would have loved this, she said. Ethan nodded, his voice catching. He's here, he said simply. Always is. They stood there for a long moment, the evening sun painting everything gold. Then Clara raised 2 fingers and 58 engines revved as one, a salute, not to the man who led them, but to the legacy that now belonged to everyone. In that sound, Ethan heard everything, the whispers of his past, the laughter of the kids at the garage, and the unspoken promise that kindness never really dies. It just keeps riding forward, finding new roads, new hearts. And as the bikers rolled away, leaving trails of light across the fading sky, Ethan looked around at the faces of the kids watching from the steps. He smiled, feeling Bear's words echo through the years like a heartbeat. Keep the road alive. He already was. It started with a single photo. Someone at the graduation had captured the moment when the Iron Legacy lined up behind the school, engines gleaming under the sunset, Ethan standing in front of them, the kids cheering from the steps. The photo went viral on social media overnight. No one planned it. No marketing, no hashtags. Just a single picture of courage and compassion side by side. But people saw it and felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Within a week, reporters began calling the Legacy Garage. Local stations, then regional ones. A national outlet picked up the story. Bikers once feared, now celebrated, how one small town changed the meaning of brotherhood. The story wasn't about fame. It was about change. About second chances. About how even in a divided world, kindness could still turn heads and hearts. Soon after, Ethan started receiving letters and messages from across the country. Some from kids. Some from parents. Some from bikers who said they'd seen the photo and wanted to do something similar in their towns. One note came from a club in Kentucky. The president, a man named Dalton, wrote, "We used to ride for the rush. Now we're thinking it's time we ride for a reason." Another message arrived from a teacher in Colorado. "We showed your story to our students. They decided to start a mentorship program with local riders. Thank you for proving that not all heroes wear badges or capes." The impact spread faster than Ethan could keep up with. Before long, 5 different towns had opened their own versions of Legacy Garage, each unique, but all rooted in the same belief, that compassion can ride alongside strength. Ethan didn't try to control it. He just supported where he could: phone calls, advice, sometimes riding out to visit a new garage on weekends. Each one had its own story, its own set of kids who needed a place to belong. He'd arrive quietly, park his bike, and just listen. Every story reminded him of the same truth: kindness, once set in motion, doesn't stop. It just finds new roads to travel. Fairhaven, once a quiet suburb, became a kind of symbol, a town rebuilt on empathy. Crime dropped. Volunteer numbers rose. People looked out for each other more. Local law enforcement even partnered with the Iron Legacy for community events, safety drives, and holiday toy runs. The same bikers who once turned heads in fear were now greeted with waves and smiles. Parents who used to pull their kids close now pointed proudly when they rode by. One summer afternoon, the mayor called Ethan into his office. She handed him a framed certificate for outstanding service to the Fairhaven community. But the real honor came next. She announced that the street outside the community center would officially be renamed Legacy Way. Ethan didn't know what to say. He wasn't one for speeches, but he managed a few words. "This isn't just about me," he said quietly. "It's about everyone who believes kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we've got." The ceremony ended with applause, but the moment that stuck came later, when Jordan, the shy kid who'd once stood silent by the garage door, came up to Ethan and handed him something wrapped in a cloth. When Ethan unfolded it, he found a small metal keychain, shaped like a motorcycle wheel with the letters LG engraved on it. "I made it in shop class," Jordan said, grinning. "Figured we should have something to hand out to new riders." Ethan turned it over in his palm, smiling softly. "You think we'll have new riders?" Jordan nodded. "We already do." He pointed down the block where a small group of kids were rolling in on bicycles, hand-me-downs, freshly repaired and decorated with tiny stickers of wings. They weren't old enough to ride motorcycles yet, but they'd been coming to the garage after school, helping, learning, and laughing. They called themselves the Mini Legacy. Ethan laughed, the sound carrying warm into the afternoon air. "Looks like the road's just getting started," he said. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the town gold, Ethan rode through Fairhaven's quiet streets. He passed the school, the park, the corner cafe, all the places where his story had once unfolded. And everywhere he looked, he saw reminders: a patched jacket on a porch, a flyer for Legacy Garage on a lamppost, a kid wearing a winged helmet racing his bike down the hill. He thought about Bear again. About the first time he heard that rumble of 58 engines and saw hope show up in the form of leather and chrome. And in that quiet, Ethan whispered to the wind, "We did it, Bear. We kept it alive." For a moment, he swore he heard something faint, almost hidden beneath the hum of his engine, a laugh, a voice, a whisper carried through the air. Maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe it was Bear, somewhere on the horizon, still riding beside him. Either way, Ethan smiled. Because deep down, he knew the Iron Legacy would never really fade. It had simply evolved. From road to garage, from riders to kids, from one man's kindness to a whole movement. And as night fell over Fairhaven, 58 stars seemed to shimmer just a little brighter, a reminder that heroes don't always need capes. Sometimes, they just need a bike, a heart, and a reason to ride. Years passed. Seasons changed. Roads that were once fresh and smooth now carried the wear of countless journeys. Fairhaven grew. New families moved in, and kids who once played in the park now had children of their own. But some things never faded: the hum of engines on Sunday mornings, the laughter spilling from the Legacy Garage, and the quiet pride that lived in the town's heart. Ethan was older now. Not old, but seasoned, the way the road makes you. His hair was touched with gray at the edges, his face lined with stories. He still rode his Yamaha, though now it shared space in the garage with other bikes, some belonging to his friends, some to the new generation of riders he'd helped raise. He didn't run Legacy Garage alone anymore. Jordan did. The same shy kid who once stood at the door now ran the place with confidence and care. He'd grown into a leader, patient, humble, and full of the same spark that once drew Ethan to Bear. Sometimes Ethan would stop by just to watch. He'd lean against the doorway, coffee in hand, as Jordan and the kids worked, the clatter of tools, the hum of laughter, the faint smell of oil and old wood filling the air. It wasn't about bikes anymore. It never really was. It was about what happened when people believed in each other. On the 10th anniversary of the first Legacy ride, Fairhaven decided to hold a celebration. Not a parade, not a formal event, just a ride through the heart of town to honor what the movement had become. Riders came from all over, Iron Legacy chapters, local garages, and families who'd been touched by the story. There were hundreds of bikes now, stretching as far as the eye could see, each one gleaming under the sun like a heartbeat of chrome and courage. Ethan stood near the front, watching the crowd gather. Jordan came up beside him, adjusting his helmet. "You ready for this?" he asked with a grin. Ethan chuckled softly. "I've been ready since the day Bear handed me that patch." They climbed onto their bikes, the engines rumbling low and steady. And as they began to roll through the streets of Fairhaven, people came out of their homes, lining the sidewalks. Kids waved small flags with the Legacy Garage emblem, wings and wheels intertwined. Some of the older residents had tears in their eyes, remembering how far things had come. As the procession passed the school, Ethan slowed down. He glanced at the spot where it all began, the front gate where a scared, lonely kid once faced bullies and found unexpected heroes. Now, that same spot held a plaque. It read, "In honor of the day kindness rode into Fairhaven and never left." Ethan smiled quietly and touched the bracelet, still on his wrist, Bear's old chain, worn but unbroken. The ride continued through town, the sound of hundreds of engines merging into one deep, steady rhythm, not noise, but music. The music of belonging, of loyalty, of love. When the sun began to dip, the riders gathered at the park for a final moment of silence. Engines off, helmets removed, heads bowed. The air was still, heavy with gratitude. Ethan looked up at the sky, streaked in gold and orange. "You were right, Bear," he whispered. "The road never ends. It just changes who's riding it." Jordan stepped forward, holding a small box, the same one Bear had once given Ethan. Inside was a brand new bracelet, forged from steel and chain links shaped like wings. He handed it to a young girl, maybe 15, the daughter of one of the riders. Her eyes were wide with awe and nerves. Ethan smiled. "Every road needs someone to keep it alive," he said gently. The girl nodded, clutching the bracelet like it was a treasure. And just like that, the legacy passed on again, quiet, unplanned, unstoppable. As night fell, the riders began to leave one by one, their taillights glowing like fireflies along the open road. Ethan stayed behind for a while, sitting by his bike, listening to the fading engines and the hum of crickets in the grass. Fairhaven was peaceful now. Kinder. Stronger. Because once upon a time, 58 bikers decided to show up for one scared kid. And from that single act, a movement was born, one that proved that courage doesn't always shout and heroes aren't always who we expect. Sometimes, they wear leather. Sometimes, they fix engines. Sometimes, they just listen when someone needs to talk. But always, they ride with heart. Ethan stood, brushed off his jacket, and took one last look at the town that had grown around the sound of hope. Then he smiled, kicked up the stand, and started his engine. The bike roared to life, steady and strong. The sound rolled through the quiet streets, echoing off the brick walls, carrying far beyond Fairhaven, out toward the open highway, where the next story was already waiting to begin. Because the Iron Legacy wasn't just a club anymore. It was a promise. A living reminder that when people ride for kindness, the road never really ends.